My sister demanded half of my daughter's $120,000 inheritance from her late father to pay for her own kids' college after never saving a dime in 18 years. When I said no, she started telling family I was hoarding dead man's money and making my daughter cry with guilt trips. Then she showed up with a lawyer, claiming her daughter was actually my husband's biological child, even though the math made it impossible since she was born 3 years before we ever met. My sister demanded half of my daughter's $120,000 inheritance from her late father to pay for her own kids' college after never saving a dime in 18 years. When I said no, she started telling family I was hoarding dead man's money and making my daughter cry with guilt trips. Then she showed up with a lawyer, claiming her daughter was actually my husband's biological child, even though the math made it impossible since she was born 3 years before we ever met. My sister wants me to split my daughter's inheritance and accuse me of hoarding money. She walked out crying when I told her no. Growing up, my younger sister Claire has always believed the world owed her something. She's the kind of person who shows up late, expects others to wait, and never says thank you. When I got married, she complained that she wasn't my maid of honor, even though she didn't help with anything. When I had my daughter Lily, Claire made my baby shower all about her pregnancy cravings, even though she wasn't pregnant. Every family event turns into a stage for her drama. She's a single mom to her daughter Mia, and while I do feel for her struggles, it's important to mention that she's never once held a full-time job longer than 6 months. She says she's just not built for the 9-to-5 life. Over the years, she's borrowed money from me, just until Friday, money I never saw again. She even asked me once to co-sign a car loan, despite her terrible credit. I declined. Since then, she's always hinted that I'm lucky, and she's not, as if financial stability fell into my lap by chance. Now, for some context, I lost my husband 5 years ago in a car accident. He was responsible, thoughtful, and thankfully, a planner. He had life insurance and left a trust fund of about $120,000 specifically for our daughter Lily. His will was very clear. The money is to be used only by Lily, when she turns 18, for education, housing, or starting her life. I've never touched a cent of it. I work full-time and have supported both myself and Lily from my own income. 2 weeks ago, Claire called me in a panic. Mia just got accepted into a university, which is great, but Claire never saved a dime for her education. Not a single college fund, no scholarships applied for, nothing. She just assumed it would work out. Now that it hasn't, she wants me to give Mia half of Lily's inheritance to pay for tuition. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She said, "Come on, it's not like Lily needs all that money. You have a good job. Mia actually has a shot at something, and we just need a little help. We're family." I told her the answer was no. That money belongs to Lily. It's her father's last gift to her. Claire started crying on the phone, saying, "I can't believe you'd let your niece suffer while your daughter lives in luxury. Mind you, we live in a modest home and Lily works a part-time job for extra cash." Then my mom got involved. She called me and said, "Claire's going through so much. She didn't plan ahead, yes, but don't punish Mia for that. Just give her something. Maybe $30,000? I was stunned. I said, "Would you have said the same if the money was left to Claire's daughter?" Silence. It didn't stop there. Claire began guilt-tripping Lily directly. She had Mia message her things like, "I guess I don't deserve a future just because my mom didn't marry rich," and "If the roles were reversed, my mom would have helped you." That pushed Lily into tears. She came to me asking if she should share the money. I hugged her and told her no, that she doesn't owe anyone anything, especially not her cousin. Last weekend, we had a family barbecue, and Claire cornered me in front of several relatives. She raised her voice and said, "You're seriously going to let my daughter drown in student debt while you hoard that money?" I calmly said, "I'm not hoarding anything. That money was left for Lily, by her father, and I will not go against his wishes because you failed to prepare." She stormed off crying. Now I'm getting messages from relatives saying I'm selfish, that I'm letting a little girl's dreams die, because I'm clinging to a dead man's money. That one hurt. But the truth is, I'm not the one failing Mia. Claire is. She had 18 years to plan. Instead, she blew money on trips, spa days, and shopping sprees she couldn't afford. And now she wants to reach into Lily's future to clean up her mess? I've blocked Mia from Lily's phone and made it clear to my mother that any more pressure will lead to low contact. I refuse to let my daughter feel guilty for being loved and planned for. But just when I thought things couldn't get more insane, I got a message from Claire saying she's hiring a lawyer because she now claims that Mia is actually my husband's biological daughter. I stared at my phone screen, reading the message 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Claire was actually claiming that Mia was my husband's biological daughter. My hands shook as I set the phone down on the kitchen counter. The timing of this accusation wasn't coincidental. 2 weeks of begging hadn't worked. Family pressure hadn't worked. Now she was resorting to the nuclear option. I walked to my home office and pulled out the filing cabinet where I kept all our important documents. My husband had been meticulous about record keeping, and I'd maintained that habit after his passing. I found what I was looking for in a folder labeled legal documents, a copy of his will, the trust paperwork, and our marriage certificate. The dates didn't add up. Mia was born 3 years before my husband and I even met. We'd been together for 12 years when he passed, which meant Mia would have been 9 when we started dating. The math alone made Claire's claim impossible, but I knew Claire wouldn't let facts get in the way of her desperation. That evening, Lily came home from her shift at the bookstore looking exhausted. She dropped her bag by the door and slumped onto the couch. I could see the weight of the past 2 weeks on her shoulders. I sat down next to her and rubbed her back. She leaned into me, and we stayed like that for a few minutes before she spoke. I told her about Claire's latest claim. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in anger. She stood up abruptly and paced the living room. I watched my daughter process this new development. She'd always been level-headed, even as a teenager, but this situation was testing her limits. After a few minutes of pacing, she stopped and looked at me with determination. We spent the rest of the evening going through old photo albums and documents. Lily wanted to see proof with her own eyes that her aunt was lying. We found pictures from family gatherings when Mia was already 6 years old, and my husband wasn't in any of them because we hadn't met yet. The next morning, I woke up to 7 17 missed calls from my mother. I knew what was coming before I even listened to the voicemail. Sure enough, my mother's voice was frantic, telling me that Claire had told her about the paternity claim and that I needed to do the right thing and get a test done. I called my mother back immediately. The conversation was exactly what I expected. She was completely taken in by Claire's story, despite the obvious timeline issues. When I pointed out that Mia was born years before I met my husband, my mother brushed it off, saying maybe Claire had the dates wrong or maybe they'd met before I knew about it. The accusation stung more than I wanted to admit. My husband had been faithful, loving, and devoted. To have his memory tarnished by Claire's lies made my chest tight with anger. I decided to be proactive. I called our family lawyer, the same one who'd handled my husband's estate. He listened to the situation and assured me that without any evidence, Claire had no legal standing. The trust was ironclad, and even if she pursued this ridiculous claim, the timeline alone would destroy her case. But I knew this wasn't really about legal standing. This was about Claire using every manipulation tactic in her arsenal to get what she wanted. Over the next few days, the family drama escalated. Claire posted on social media about how some people would rather see family suffer than share their wealth. She didn't name names, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Comments poured in from distant relatives and family friends, most of whom had no idea about the full situation. My phone buzzed constantly with messages. Some relatives tried to play peacemaker, suggesting we all sit down and talk it out. Others were more direct, calling me selfish and heartless. A few supported me, but they were quiet about it, not wanting to get involved in the drama. The worst part was watching how it affected Lily. She deleted her social media accounts after seeing her aunt's posts and the comments from family members. She threw herself into work and her studies, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. One evening, I found her in her room looking at a photo of her and her father from when she was 13. They were at a father-daughter dance, both of them grinning at the camera. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she traced his face with her finger. I sat on her bed and pulled her into a hug. She cried harder, all the stress and pain of the past few weeks pouring out. When she finally calmed down, she looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. She told me she felt guilty, not about the money, but about the fact that she had something Mia didn't, a father who'd loved her and planned for her future. She wondered if maybe she should share, not because she owed it to anyone, but because it might make the pain stop. I held her face in my hands and looked her in the eye. I told her that her father's love wasn't something to feel guilty about. He'd worked hard to provide for her, and honoring his wishes wasn't selfish. I reminded her that Mia's lack of college funds wasn't her fault or her responsibility. We talked for hours that night about her father, about family, about boundaries. By the time we finished, some of the weight had lifted from her shoulders. The next day, Claire showed up at my workplace. I was in the middle of a meeting when our receptionist knocked and said my sister was in the lobby, insisting she needed to speak with me urgently. I excused myself from the meeting and went to the lobby. Claire was there, dressed in her best outfit, clearly trying to look respectable. She had papers in her hand, which she waved at me as soon as she saw me. She announced loudly enough for everyone to hear that she had proof of her claim. The receptionist and a few coworkers who were passing by stopped to watch. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and anger. I told her this wasn't the place for this discussion, and that she needed to leave. She refused, saying I'd been avoiding her and she had no choice. Security eventually had to escort her out, but not before she yelled that I'd be hearing from her lawyer. My boss called me into his office after the incident. He was understanding but concerned about the disruption. I apologized and briefly explained the situation. He shook his head in sympathy and told me to take the rest of the day off to deal with my family issue. I drove home feeling humiliated and furious. Claire had crossed a line by bringing this to my workplace. When I got home, I found Lily there. She'd left work early after getting a series of texts from Mia. The texts were manipulative and cruel. Mia claimed she'd always felt a connection to Lily's dad, that she'd wondered why he looked at her strangely at family gatherings, that maybe now she understood why. It was all lies, designed to plant doubt and guilt. I took Lily's phone and blocked Mia's number again, along with any other way she could contact her. Then I did something I should have done weeks ago. I called Claire. She answered on the first ring, clearly expecting my call. I told her in no uncertain terms that her behavior was harassment, that showing up at my workplace was unacceptable, and that if she continued, I would take legal action. She started crying, saying I was being cruel, that she just wanted what was best for her daughter. I cut her off and told her that what was best for her daughter would have been 18 years of planning and saving, not trying to steal from her niece. The conversation ended with Claire screaming that I'd regret this, that family should stick together, and that our parents would be ashamed of me. I hung up and immediately called my lawyer to discuss a restraining order. That weekend, my mother called a family meeting. She said it was to clear the air and find a solution that worked for everyone. I knew it was an ambush, but I also knew that not showing up would be used against me. Lily wanted to come with me, but I insisted she stay home. This wasn't her fight, and I didn't want her subjected to more manipulation. I arrived at my mother's house to find Claire already there, along with several aunts, uncles, and cousins. It was clear sides had been chosen, and I was outnumbered. The meeting started with my mother talking about the importance of family, how we needed to support each other, how my husband would have wanted us to take care of everyone. It was emotional manipulation at its finest. Then Claire presented her evidence, a photo of my husband holding baby Mia at a family gathering. She claimed it showed a father's love in his eyes. I almost laughed at the absurdity. The photo was from Mia's first birthday party, years before my husband and I met. He wasn't even in the photo. It was my cousin Robert, who had similar coloring. I pointed this out, and Claire's face went red. She insisted I was lying, that I'd always known the truth. Some family members started to look uncomfortable, realizing the photo clearly wasn't my husband. The meeting devolved from there. Accusations flew, voices were raised, and old grievances were aired. Through it all, I remained calm, sticking to the facts. The money was Lily's, left by her father, and I would not betray his wishes or steal from my daughter. My Aunt Theodora was the first to break the uncomfortable silence. She cleared her throat and suggested we all take a step back and think about what was best for the family. I watched her fidget with her purse strap, avoiding eye contact with me. She'd always been the peacekeeper, but even she seemed uncertain about Claire's wild accusation. Claire seized the moment to pull out more evidence from her folder. She produced what looked like old receipts and bank statements, claiming they proved my husband had been sending her money for Mia's care. I stepped forward to examine them more closely. The papers were photocopies, blurry and hard to read, but I could make out enough to see they were from a joint account Claire had shared with her ex-boyfriend years ago. I pointed this out calmly and watched as several relatives leaned in to look. My uncle shook his head and stepped back, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this was taking. Claire's hands trembled as she shuffled through more papers, her desperation becoming more apparent with each passing moment. My mother tried to salvage the situation by suggesting we all sit down and discuss this rationally, but there was nothing rational about Claire's behavior. She was grasping at straws, creating a fantasy to justify her attempt to steal from her niece. The meeting ended with no resolution. Several family members left looking troubled, whispering among themselves. Claire packed up her evidence with shaking hands, shooting me venomous looks. My mother hugged me goodbye, but it felt stiff and obligatory. On the drive home, I felt drained. The family I'd grown up with was fracturing over money that wasn't even theirs to claim. I stopped at a red light and rubbed my temples, trying to ease the tension headache that had been building all day. When I got home, Lily was curled up on the couch watching a movie. She paused it when I walked in and studied my face. I could see the questions in her eyes, but I was too exhausted to go into details. I simply told her the meeting hadn't gone well and that we needed to stay strong. The next few days brought a temporary lull in the drama. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. Lily seemed to be doing better too, focusing on her studies and picking up extra shifts at the bookstore. We established a new routine of checking in with each other every evening, making sure neither of us was being contacted by Claire or Mia. But the peace didn't last. On Thursday afternoon, I received a call from my daughter's high school. The counselor informed me that Lily had been absent from her last 2 classes, and they were concerned. My heart raced as I immediately called Lily's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I left work immediately, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. I called the bookstore, but they said Lily wasn't scheduled to work that day. I drove home, praying I'd find her there safe. Relief flooded through me when I saw her car in the driveway. I found her in her room, sitting on the floor surrounded by photo albums and old letters. Her eyes were puffy from crying. She looked up at me with such pain in her expression that my heart broke. She explained that Mia had created a fake social media account and had been sending her messages all day. The messages included photos of Claire and Mia struggling, pictures of overdue bills, screenshots of college rejection letters due to financial aid issues. I sat down beside my daughter and pulled her close. She sobbed into my shoulder, overwhelmed by the guilt her aunt and cousin were piling on her. I held her until she calmed down, then helped her block the fake account and report it to the platform. That evening, I made Lily's favorite dinner and we ate together in comfortable silence. Afterward, she helped me wash dishes, and I could see some of the tension leaving her shoulders. We were a team, and we would get through this together. The next morning brought a new development. My mother called to inform me that Claire had been telling extended family members that I'd had an affair during my marriage, and that's why I was so defensive about the paternity claim. The lie was so outrageous that I actually laughed, but the laughter quickly turned to anger. I spent the morning fielding calls from various relatives. Some wanted to know if the affair rumor was true. Others called to express their disgust with Claire's behavior. My Aunt Theodora called to apologize for the family meeting, admitting she now saw how manipulative Claire was being. But the damage was spreading. My husband's elderly parents called, confused and hurt by the rumors they were hearing. I spent an hour on the phone with them, explaining the situation and reassuring them that their son had been faithful and devoted. They were relieved but saddened by Claire's actions. That afternoon, I decided to take action. I gathered all the documentation I had, photos, dates, records, and created a timeline that definitively proved Claire's claims were impossible. I scanned everything and created a digital file that I could easily share with family members who had questions. I also reached out to a few relatives who had been at family events during the relevant time frame. My cousin agreed to provide a statement about the family reunion where the photo was taken, confirming it was Robert in the picture, not my husband. My aunt remembered the exact date of Mia's first birthday party, and confirmed my husband wasn't there because we hadn't met yet. While I was building my case, Claire was escalating hers. She showed up at Lily's school, trying to speak with her during lunch. Fortunately, the school security intercepted her, as I'd already informed them about the situation, and asked them to prevent any contact. Lily called me from the school office, shaken by the incident. I left work again to pick her up, and we spent the afternoon at a nearby park, talking through everything. She was scared that Claire would never stop, that this would go on forever. I assured her that we would find a way to end this, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. My vibrant, confident daughter was becoming anxious and withdrawn. That night, I made the decision to be more proactive in protecting her. The following Monday, I met with the school principal and counselor to discuss additional security measures. They were supportive and implemented a system where Lily could check in with the office if she felt unsafe. They also agreed to escort her to her car after school if needed. I also spoke with Lily's manager at the bookstore, explaining the situation in broad terms. He assured me they would keep an eye out for any family members trying to approach her during her shifts, and would call me immediately if anything happened. These precautions proved necessary. Claire attempted to ambush Lily at the bookstore that Wednesday evening. The manager intercepted her and asked her to leave. When she refused, he threatened to call the police. She left, but not before causing a scene that embarrassed Lily in front of her coworkers and customers. That night, Lily came home in tears again. She was exhausted from constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering when the next ambush would come. I held her as she cried, my own anger building with each sob. The next day, I took a personal day from work and drove to Claire's apartment. I needed to confront her directly, to make her understand the damage she was causing. I knocked on her door, and when she answered, word. Her expression shifted from surprise to defiance. I told her exactly what her actions were doing to Lily. I described the anxiety, the tears, the fear. I explained how she was traumatizing her own niece for money that would never be hers. Claire's response was to blame me, saying if I just shared the money in the beginning, none of this would have happened. Her complete lack of accountability was staggering. She saw herself as the victim, unable to recognize that her own choices had led to this situation. I left her apartment feeling more frustrated than ever. That weekend, the family drama reached a new low. My mother hosted Sunday dinner, and I reluctantly attended with Lily, hoping for some normalcy. But Claire had gotten there first and had been filling everyone's ears with her version of events. The atmosphere was tense from the moment we arrived. Conversations stopped when we entered rooms. Some relatives avoided eye contact. Others whispered behind their hands. Lily stuck close to me, clearly uncomfortable. During dinner, Claire made pointed comments about family loyalty and helping those in need. She talked about Mia's dreams being crushed and how some people valued money over blood. Each word was a dart aimed at us. I maintained my composure until Claire mentioned my husband again, suggesting he would be disappointed in how I was handling his daughter's education. That crossed a line. I stood up calmly and announced that we were leaving. As we gathered our things, my mother tried to convince us to stay, saying we needed to work this out as a family. I looked her in the eye and told her that family doesn't lie, manipulate, and harass each other. Family doesn't try to steal from children. The drive home was quiet. Lily stared out the window, and I could see her reflection in the glass, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. When we got home, she went straight to her room. I gave her some space before checking on her. I found her packing a bag. Panic shot through me until she explained she wanted to stay with her best friend for a few days, just to get away from the drama. I understood, but worried about her feeling like she had to flee her own home. After calling her friend's parents to arrange the stay, I helped Lily finish packing. As I drove her over, she opened up about how isolated she felt. Most of the family was either actively against us or staying silent to avoid conflict. She felt like she'd lost not just her aunt and cousin, but her entire extended family. I promised her that real family, the people who truly loved us, would see the truth eventually. But I could see she wasn't convinced. The damage Claire was causing went far beyond money. She was destroying relationships that had taken decades to build. While Lily was at her friend's house, I used the time to research our options more thoroughly. I consulted with the lawyer again about harassment charges and restraining orders. He advised documenting everything, every encounter, every message, every incident. I created a detailed log of Claire's behavior, dating back to her first request for money. The pattern of escalation was clear when laid out chronologically, from asking to demanding, from guilt-tripping to lying, from family pressure to outright harassment. My documentation efforts proved valuable sooner than expected. Claire made another social media post, this time including a photo of Mia crying, with a caption about how some family members would rather see children suffer than share their hoarded wealth. The post went viral within our extended social circle. I screenshot the post and added it to my file. Then I crafted my own response, not on social media, but in a carefully worded email to all family members. I attached the timeline I'd created, the statements from relatives confirming the truth, and a clear explanation of why Claire's claims were impossible. The response was immediate. Some relatives called to apologize for doubting me. Others expressed shock at Claire's deception. A few remained stubborn, but the tide was turning. The truth was finally starting to outweigh the lies. But Claire wasn't done. When her paternity lie fell apart, she pivoted to a new strategy. She started claiming that my husband had verbally promised to help with Mia's education, that there had been a gentleman's agreement that I was now refusing to honor. This new lie was even more insidious because it couldn't be definitively disproven. There were no witnesses to contradict her, no documents to refute it. It was her word against a dead man's silence. I watched this new narrative spread through the family grapevine with growing frustration. Some relatives who had started to see through Claire's lies were now uncertain again. The emotional manipulation was masterful, painting my husband as a generous man whose wishes I was betraying. Lily heard about this new claim while at her friend's house. She called me, furious. She knew her father better than anyone and was outraged that Claire would put words in his mouth. She wanted to come home and confront her aunt, but I convinced her to stay put for her own well-being. Instead, I decided to fight fire with facts. I went through my husband's emails, looking for any communication with Claire about Mia's future. What I found was revealing. Several emails where my husband politely declined Claire's requests for loans, citing his responsibility to save for Lily's future. I also found a particularly damning email where Claire had asked him to co-sign a loan for a new car, and he'd refused, explaining that he couldn't take on financial obligations that might impact Lily's inheritance. His priority had always been clear. I forwarded these emails to key family members, letting my husband's own words speak for themselves. The emails painted a picture of a man who was kind but firm about his financial boundaries, who consistently prioritized his daughter's future. Claire's response was swift and desperate. She claimed the emails were fake, that I'd doctored them somehow. But several family members remembered similar conversations with my husband and began to speak up. Her credibility was crumbling. As her lies unraveled, Claire's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up at random family members' houses, pleading her case with tears and hysteria. She accused me of turning the family against her, of poisoning everyone's minds. My aunt Theodora called to tell me about Claire's visit to her house. Claire had broken down completely, admitting she was desperate and didn't know what else to do. She'd maxed out credit cards trying to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford, assuming something would work out for Mia's college. Now reality was crashing down. While I felt a twinge of sympathy for her desperation, it didn't excuse her behavior. Her financial irresponsibility wasn't my daughter's burden to bear. Her lies and manipulation had caused real harm that couldn't be undone with tears. The situation reached a turning point when Claire made one final desperate move. She convinced Mia to write a letter to Lily, a heartfelt, manipulative plea that played on every emotional button. The letter was delivered to our house while I was at work. Lily found it when she returned home from her friend's house. By the time I got home, she was sitting at the kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of her, tears streaming down her face. The letter was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, painting Mia as a victim of circumstances beyond her control, begging for her cousin's help. I sat down across from my daughter and took her hands in mine. We talked for hours about guilt, responsibility, and the difference between helping and enabling. I reminded her that her father had worked hard for that money, that it was meant to secure her future, not fix other people's poor planning. By the end of our conversation, Lily had made a decision. She wanted to write a letter of her own, not to Mia, but to the entire family. She wanted to speak her truth, to explain how this situation had affected her, to set the record straight once and for all. I watched with pride as my daughter crafted her response. She wrote about her father's love and sacrifice. She explained how the inheritance wasn't just money, but a final gift from a father to his daughter. She described the pain of being manipulated and guilt-tripped by family members she'd trusted. Most importantly, she made it clear that while she sympathized with Mia's situation, it wasn't her responsibility to fix it. She pointed out that there were many options for college funding, loans, scholarships, community college, that didn't involve stealing from another teenager's inheritance. We sent the letter to every family member involved in the drama. The response was overwhelming. Many relatives called to apologize directly to Lily, expressing shame at how they'd treated her. Others shared their own stories of Claire's past manipulations, patterns they'd ignored or excused for years. My mother was the last to respond. She came to our house in person, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen her. She apologized for taking Claire's side, for pressuring us, for not seeing the truth sooner. She hugged Lily and told her she was proud of her strength. But Claire wasn't finished. Cornered and exposed, she made one last desperate attempt. She showed up at our house late one evening, Mia in tow. They stood on our doorstep, Claire holding an envelope that she claimed contained legal papers. I didn't let them in. I stood in the doorway and listened as Claire made her final threat. She claimed she'd found a lawyer who would take their case, that she would sue for emotional distress and defamation. The papers in her hand trembled as she spoke, betraying her uncertainty. I remained calm and told her to have her lawyer contact mine. I reminded her that truth was an absolute defense against defamation, and that her own actions had caused any distress she was experiencing. Then I closed the door on her shocked face. Through the window, I watched them walk back to their car. Mia was crying, and for a moment I felt sorry for her. She was a victim too, a victim of her mother's poor planning and manipulation. But that didn't make her entitled to Lily's inheritance. The legal threat never materialized. No lawyer would take such a baseless case, especially once they saw the evidence I'd compiled. Claire's final gambit had failed, leaving her with nothing but the consequences of her own actions. The family fallout continued for weeks. Claire isolated herself, cutting contact with most relatives. Some family members tried to maintain relationships with both sides, while others chose clear positions. The family dynamic had shifted permanently. The silence that followed Claire's departure lasted exactly 3 days. I knew it wouldn't hold. Desperation makes people predictable, and Claire had nowhere left to turn. On Tuesday morning, I discovered she'd been busy. My cousin called to warn me that Claire had been visiting elderly relatives, spinning tales of cruelty and abandonment. She'd shown up at our great-aunt's nursing home with Mia, both of them crying about lost opportunities and family betrayal. I drove to the nursing home that afternoon. The staff recognized me from my regular visits and waved me through. I found my great-aunt in the common room looking troubled. She gripped my hand when I sat beside her, her papery skin warm against mine. She told me about Claire's visit, how they'd wept and begged, how Claire had painted me as heartless. But my great-aunt had lived through real hardship, the Depression, a world war, raising 6 children on a factory worker's salary. She knew the difference between genuine need and manufactured crisis. She patted my hand and told me she'd seen through it all. She'd told Claire that planning for your children's future was a parent's job, not a cousin's burden. The relief on her face when I confirmed the truth about the timeline and the trust fund was profound. That evening, Lily returned home from her friend's house. She looked stronger, more resolved. We cooked dinner together, moving around the kitchen in comfortable synchronization. As we chopped vegetables, she told me she'd been thinking about everything that had happened. She'd realized something important during her time away. Claire's behavior had shown her the value of what her father had done, not just leaving money, but teaching through example about responsibility and planning. She understood now why I'd fought so hard to protect his final gift to her. The next morning brought another surprise. My phone rang at 6 a.m., my brother calling from across the country. He'd been largely absent from the family drama, living his own life far from our hometown. But Claire had reached out to him too, trying to expand her network of pressure. He'd listened to her whole story, then done what Claire hadn't expected. He'd called me for the truth. After hearing both sides, his response was blunt and characteristic. He told me he'd informed Claire that if she'd spent half the energy on job applications that she'd spent on manipulation, Mia would have a college fund by now. His call reminded me that not all family members were susceptible to Claire's tactics. Some could see through the performance to the pattern beneath. He promised to reach out to other distant relatives with the truth, before Claire could poison those wells too. Thursday afternoon, I was reviewing documents at work when our receptionist forwarded a call. It was the manager from Lily's bookstore. Claire had shown up again, this time with a different approach. She'd tried to apply for a job there, claiming she wanted to work alongside her niece to repair their relationship. The manager had recognized her from the previous incident and politely declined her application. But Claire had lingered, approaching customers and employees with her sob story. She'd finally been asked to leave when she'd started asking people to donate to Mia's college fund. I thanked him for the information and immediately texted Lily to warn her. She responded with an eye roll emoji and a promise to be careful. Her resilience in the face of this continued harassment made me proud and worried in equal measure. That evening, I found an envelope shoved under our front door. No postmark, no return address, clearly hand-delivered. Inside was a printout of a social media post Claire had made on a fundraising site. She'd created a campaign for Mia's education, complete with a heart-wrenching story about family abandonment and stolen futures. The post was carefully crafted to avoid outright lies while implying terrible things. She'd raised a few $100s from strangers who didn't know the real story. But what caught my attention was the comments section. Several family members had found the post and were publicly correcting the narrative. My Aunt Theodora had written a particularly scathing response, outlining Claire's history of financial irresponsibility and manipulation. Other relatives had chimed in with their own experiences of Claire's borrowing and never repaying. The fundraiser was being reported for misleading information. Friday morning, I woke to find Claire's car parked across the street from our house. She was just sitting there, watching. I documented it with photos and timestamps, adding to my ever-growing file. When I left for work, she followed me for several blocks before turning off. This new tactic continued through the weekend. She'd park where we could see her, just watching. Never approaching, never technically doing anything illegal, but making her presence known. Lily started checking the windows before going outside, her anxiety creeping back. I consulted with the lawyer again about stalking laws and protective orders. He reviewed my documentation and said we were building a strong case if Claire escalated further. The key was maintaining detailed records of every incident. Sunday brought an unexpected ally. Claire's ex-boyfriend, Mia's father, reached out to me. He'd been largely absent from Mia's life, paying minimal child support and rarely visiting. But Claire's recent behavior had caught his attention when mutual friends started asking him about the inheritance drama. He offered to provide a statement about Claire's financial habits during their relationship. He had records of her spending, her refusal to save, her expectation that something would work out for Mia's future. He felt guilty for his own absence but was appalled by Claire's current actions. I accepted his offer and added his statement to my file. The picture it painted of Claire was consistent. Someone who lived beyond her means, avoided responsibility, and expected others to clean up her messes. His documentation included old bank statements showing shopping sprees while he'd begged her to save for Mia. Monday morning arrived with Claire trying yet another angle. She showed up at my mother's house during our weekly coffee visit, acting as if nothing had happened. She sat down at the kitchen table and started chatting about normal things. The weather, a TV show, anything but the elephant in the room. My mother looked between us uncertainly. I could see her desire for family harmony warring with her recognition of Claire's behavior. When Claire casually mentioned Mia's college situation, I stood up to leave. Claire's mask slipped then. She accused me of destroying the family, of being vindictive and cruel. My mother finally found her backbone and told Claire that the only person destroying the family was the one lying and manipulating everyone. The confrontation escalated quickly. Claire screamed about unfairness, about how I'd always been the favorite, how I'd married well while she struggled. Years of resentment poured out in a toxic flood. My mother's face went pale as she realized how deep Claire's bitterness ran. I left them to their confrontation and went home. Lily was there, having taken a mental health day from school with my permission. We spent the afternoon organizing her college application materials, focusing on the future her father had secured for her. That evening, my mother called. She'd spent hours with Claire after I'd left, finally seeing the full extent of her younger daughter's issues. Claire had admitted to massive credit card debt, to lying about job interviews, to spending Mia's child support on herself. The inheritance drama was just the latest in a lifetime of poor choices. Tuesday brought more revelations. My cousin who'd been at Mia's first birthday party came forward with photos from that day. He digitized old family videos and found footage clearly showing it was Robert, not my husband. In the photo Claire had presented as evidence. He posted the video in our family group chat with timestamps proving the truth. The family response was swift and decisive. Those who'd been on the fence saw Claire's deception laid bare. Apologies poured in from relatives who doubted me. Some expressed anger at being manipulated, others shame at how quickly they'd turned against us. Claire's response to being exposed was to double down. She created new social media accounts to spread her version of events. She reached out to my husband's distant relatives, people we barely knew, trying to find anyone who would take her side. Most ignored her, but a few called me, confused by her stories. I spent hours on the phone that week, calmly explaining the situation to various people. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Initial concern based on Claire's lies, then understanding as I presented facts. Finally, anger at being dragged into drama by someone they barely knew. Wednesday afternoon, Lily came home from school with news. Mia had approached her in the parking lot, alone this time. Instead of guilt-tripping or manipulation, Mia had apologized. She'd told Lily she was tired of being her mother's weapon, that she knew the inheritance wasn't hers to claim. The conversation had been brief, but significant. Mia revealed she'd already started applying for student loans and scholarships on her own. She'd gotten a part-time job without telling Claire. She was trying to break free from her mother's pattern of expecting others to provide. Lily had been cautious but compassionate. She told Mia she understood the difficulty of her position, but couldn't have a relationship while Claire continued her harassment. Mia had nodded sadly, and promised not to contact her again until things changed. That evening, I noticed Claire's car wasn't in its usual surveillance spot. The relief was temporary. She'd simply moved to parking near Lily's school. The security guard called to inform me, adding it to their incident log. The documentation was building toward legal action if needed. Thursday brought the most dramatic development yet. Claire showed up at a family funeral, a distant cousin we all barely knew. She used the gathering as an opportunity to corner relatives, weeping about her struggles and painting me as heartless. But her audience had shifted. Word had spread through the family network about her lies, her harassment, her stalking behavior. Instead of sympathy, she met cold shoulders and direct confrontations. Our uncle told her she was embarrassing herself. Our cousin asked her to leave before she made a scene at a funeral. The rejection broke something in Claire. She stood in the church parking lot, screaming at anyone who would listen. She accused the entire family of conspiring against her, of being bought by my money, of choosing wealth over blood. Several relatives recorded her breakdown, adding to the evidence of her instability. Friday morning, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a family counselor Claire had seen years ago, breaking protocol to warn me. Claire had shown up at his office, demanding he write a letter supporting her claim to the the inheritance. When he'd refused and reminded her of patient confidentiality, she'd become aggressive. He was calling because he was genuinely concerned about escalation. He couldn't share details of their past sessions, but he urged me to take security precautions. His warning sent chills down my spine. A professional who'd seen Claire at her worst was worried about what she might do next. I upgraded our home security system that day. New locks, cameras, motion sensors, perhaps excessive, but Lily's safety was paramount. We established check-in protocols and safe words. The precautions felt surreal but necessary. Saturday arrived with relative calm. Claire's car wasn't in any of its usual spots. Her social media had gone quiet. The family group chat was free of drama. The silence felt ominous rather than peaceful. My instincts proved correct. That evening, my mother called in tears. Claire had shown up at her house with a moving truck, announcing she was leaving town. She'd been evicted from her apartment for non-payment, had lost another job, and was moving in with a friend several states away. But she wasn't going quietly. She'd spent the day calling family members with one last manipulation, claiming I'd driven her out of town, that I'd destroyed her life and left her homeless. Most saw through it, but the calls were exhausting for everyone. Sunday morning, I helped my mother clean out items Claire had left at her house. We found evidence of Claire's financial disaster: overdue bills, court summons for unpaid debts, rejection letters from loan companies. The inheritance had never been about Mia's education. It had been about Claire's desperation to avoid bankruptcy. Among the papers, we found something heartbreaking: letters Mia had written to Claire over the years, begging her to save money, to keep jobs, to plan for the future. The teenager had been the adult in their relationship, watching her mother spiral while trying to prepare for her own future. My mother broke down completely. She blamed herself for enabling Claire's behavior over the years, for making excuses, for not forcing her to face consequences sooner. I held her as she grieved for the daughter she'd lost to entitlement and manipulation. That afternoon, Mia texted Lily one last time. She was staying with her father temporarily while Claire moved. She decided to defer college for a year to work and save money. She thanked Lily for not giving in to the manipulation, and said maybe someday, when Claire wasn't between them, they could be cousins again. Monday morning arrived with news that Claire had indeed left town. She'd posted one final social media rant about family betrayal before deactivating her accounts. Relatives reported feeling relief at her departure, though worry about what she'd do next lingered. I returned to work feeling like I'd aged years and weeks. My colleagues noticed the difference. The stress had taken its toll, but there was also a sense of accomplishment. I'd protected my daughter's inheritance and honored my husband's wishes despite enormous pressure.